The eyes of the entire first-class cabin locked onto the young woman in the simple shirt. She stood tall, raising her ID card, the bold letters shining clearly. Chief Executive Officer, Aurora Airlines. There were no more excuses, no more room to hide behind prejudice. Amelia Brooks, the first black woman to lead a major U.S. airline, spoke with calm but undeniable authority to the man who had spent the flight disrespecting her. "You've made it very clear who you believe deserves respect, and that is the real problem." The atmosphere inside the cabin froze. A powerful lesson in respect, delivered 35,000 feet above the ground. If you love inspiring stories about change and justice, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to join us on this emotional journey. First-class passenger mocks a black woman's outfit, is stunned to learn she's the CEO of the airline as Amelia Brooks stepped into the first-class cabin of Aurora Airlines' Boeing 787 Dreamliner flight. She immediately sensed that something was different. Perhaps it was the slight hesitation in the flight attendant's greeting, or the curious glances from passengers already settled into their luxurious seats. As the new CEO of Aurora Airlines and the youngest black woman ever to lead a major airline, Amelia was no stranger to being underestimated. Today, instead of her usual business suit, she had chosen her favorite casual outfit, dark jeans and a simple shirt, for a covert inspection of the customer experience. What Amelia didn't anticipate was becoming the target of discrimination, an event that would reveal the darkest sides of privilege, prejudice, and power at 35,000 feet. The atmosphere in first class carried a distinct scent, a mix of expensive perfumes, leather, and essential oils, with just a hint of entitlement. Amelia took a deep breath as she gently made her way down the aisle, avoiding eye contact with the other passengers. As she was stowing her small handbag in the overhead bin, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, are you sure you're not in the wrong place? Economy boarding will start in about 20 minutes. Amelia slowly turned to face a middle-aged man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with neatly combed salt-and-pepper hair and manicured hands resting on the seat like a throne. "I'm in the right place." "Thank you," Amelia replied calmly, pulling out her boarding pass from her pocket, seat 2A. The man who would later introduce himself as Douglas Harrington, a senior partner at one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms, raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so Aurora's giving out free upgrades these days." Impressive. Amelia stayed silent, biting her lip, and took her seat. It wasn't the first time she had encountered prejudice based on her appearance, but Douglas's tone indicated that this flight would require more patience than usual. What Amelia didn't know was that Douglas was struggling with his own failures. His law firm was under investigation, his marriage was crumbling, and his only daughter had cut ties years ago. Contempt for others had become his shield, and today Amelia was his latest target. As boarding continued, Amelia opened her tablet and began updating a confidential report on the passenger experience, a secret project she was conducting to improve service quality, particularly in the premium cabin, where customer satisfaction scores had recently plummeted. 8 weeks into her role as CEO, she had already surprised many with her hands-on leadership style and her refusal to accept complacency. "First time flying first class." Douglas's voice cut in again, his eyes darting to Amelia's modest watch, a stark contrast to the luxury timepieces worn by the surrounding passengers. "Not exactly." Amelia kept her tone, even though a storm was brewing inside her. "Let me guess you won a diversity initiative at your company, a secretary getting a once-in-a-lifetime VIP seat experience." He chuckled, trying to rope in nearby passengers into laughing with him. But most remained silent, creating an awkward void. Only Lena Park, a tech entrepreneur seated across the aisle, looked up from her laptop and coldly said, Instead of interrupting someone's journey, maybe you should focus on your own flight." Douglas frowned. "I'm just making conversation." "No," Lena replied curtly. "You're making assumptions." Amelia gave Lena a small nod of thanks, but stayed silent. Today, she was not the CEO. She was an observing passenger, and what she was witnessing spoke volumes about the ingrained culture in Aurora Airlines first class. As the flight attendants began serving pre-departure champagne, Amelia noticed Simon Gray, the lead flight attendant, hesitating slightly before offering her a drink. It was a fleeting moment, but with her keen leadership eye, she didn't miss it. "I'll have water, please," Amelia said softly. Douglas snorted. "Some people just don't appreciate the finer things." Amelia turned to him, meeting his gaze directly. "I know exactly what's good for me, sir. Douglas Harrington," he introduced himself proudly. "You've probably heard of Harrington Fox and Partners handling lawsuits for dozens of Fortune 100 companies." "Can't say I have," Amelia replied coolly, turning back to her tablet. The aircraft began taxiing to the runway, and Amelia didn't miss the whispered exchange between Simon Gray and a female attendant, both sneaking glances at her. Another note was added to her confidential report. Systemic issues detected. Douglas Harrington, no less, was becoming a living, breathing example of the problem. The distance between the scrutinizing glances and the heavy silence in the first-class cabin grew thicker. Every time Douglas Harrington threw a sideways glance or dropped a sarcastic comment, the atmosphere became even more suffocating. What neither Douglas nor Amelia Brooks realized was that they were being closely watched. 2 rows behind Nathan Cross, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist known for exposing toxic corporate cultures, was sitting and observing their every move. He had originally scheduled to write a profile on the new CEO of Aurora Airlines, but ironically, he had found himself on this very flight where a story far more compelling was unfolding before his eyes. During the meal service, Amelia excused herself to go to the restroom. In the narrow hallway, she encountered Simon Gray, the lead flight attendant arranging beverage trays. "Is your meal satisfactory, ma'am?" Simon asked, his tone polite, but lacking the friendliness he reserved for other passengers. "The food was very good," Amelia replied, her eyes keenly observing his reaction. But the atmosphere could use some improvement. Simon's face showed a flicker of embarrassment before he quickly regained his professional demeanor. "Harrington is one of our diamond customers. He's quite particular." "Particular," Amelia repeated, her tone lightly, emphasizing the word. Simon hesitated. "If you're feeling uncomfortable, I could." "It's not your job to police passengers," Amelia interrupted, her tone softening. "But it is your responsibility to ensure every passenger is treated fairly. Would you agree?" Simon's gaze wavered. There was something about this woman that unsettled him, a calm authority he couldn't quite explain. "Of course," Simon replied cautiously. "If there's anything specific you'd like us to improve, please let us know." Amelia simply smiled. "Just treat me like anyone else in this cabin. That's all." She returned to her seat, just in time to hear Douglas Harrington eagerly conversing with an older gentleman across the aisle. "The problem with businesses these days," Douglas said loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear, "is that they're too focused on these diversity hires and forget about real merit. Like Aurora Airlines appointing some young girl as CEO, and now look, the stock prices are tanking." George Whitmore, CEO of a major manufacturing conglomerate and a member of Aurora's board of directors, glanced briefly at Amelia as she returned to her seat. She subtly shook her head, signaling him not to intervene. "Yet I happen to sit on Aurora's board," George spoke up in an even tone, "and I was part of the CEO selection committee." Douglas immediately shifted his demeanor, trying to leverage the connection. "Then you must understand my concern. I'm not prejudiced, but handing over a major airline to someone inexperienced just to diversify is reckless. George remained steady. The new CEO graduated top of her class from Harvard, successfully turned around 2 regional airlines, and served as COO at Aurora for 3 years. I would hardly call that inexperienced. Douglas waved dismissively, his tone scoffing. Academic achievements are one thing. Real-world leadership is another. I bet she's never even flown first class to experience real service. If the situation weren't so ironic, Amelia might have laughed. Instead, she focused on her tablet, meticulously recording every word and action, living evidence of a culture of prejudice, quietly eroding customer trust. 3 hours passed. Most passengers had dozed off or were engrossed in in-flight entertainment. At this moment, Lena Park quietly moved to the empty seat next to Amelia. "I hope you don't mind," she whispered. "I couldn't stand sitting across from him any longer." Amelia smiled. "I'm glad to have you, Lena." "You know who I am?" Lena asked. Surprised Neurogenics, your AI company is revolutionizing how businesses handle unstructured data. I've been following your work for a while. Lena studied Amelia carefully, as if trying to piece something together. "You're not just an ordinary passenger, are you?" Amelia hesitated for a moment. Her CEO identity still needed to be kept under wraps, but Lena's intervention with Douglas had earned her some trust. "Let's just say I'm very interested in how different passengers are treated on this flight." Lena nodded slightly, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "You work for Aurora, don't you?" "Something like that," Amelia answered, a soft smile forming on her lips. "Then your notes must be quite revealing," Lena remarked. "This is my 9th first-class flight this quarter, and I've had more than a few experiences with discrimination, but he's been particularly blatant." Amelia seized the opportunity. "Is this kind of experience common on Aurora flights?" "It's not always this bad," Lena admitted, "but there's a pattern. The attentiveness of the crew seems reserved for certain types of passengers. As an Asian woman, I often have to ask twice for something that others are offered right away." Amelia continued taking notes, her heart tightening. These were the truths traditional customer surveys could never fully capture. Meanwhile, from his seat behind them, Nathan Cross kept observing his journalistic instincts, telling him he was witnessing a story far greater than the one he had originally set out to tell. The flight continued quietly, but within Amelia, a silent revolution had been ignited. As Amelia Brooks nodded, jotting down Lena Park's honest accounts, she knew these were exactly the kinds of insights that conventional surveys could never reach. Vivid, real-world experiences like these painted the true picture of the customer service landscape. What neither Amelia nor Lena realized was that their entire conversation was being carefully observed. From a few rows back, Nathan Cross, the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, watched intently. Originally tasked with writing a simple introductory piece about Aurora Airlines' new CEO, he now realized he was witnessing a story far more explosive. The photo the newsroom had sent him earlier showed Amelia in a pristine business suit, her hair slicked back in a classic polished style. The casually dressed woman in Seat 2A now only faintly resembled that image. Yet something about the way she carried herself made it impossible for Nathan to look away. Meanwhile, Douglas Harrington's behavior was spiraling out of control. After his 3rd glass of hard liquor, his words became louder, his attitude increasingly crude. When Douglas snapped his fingers to summon Simon Gray, as though calling a servant, several passengers frowned in discomfort. "This is why I only fly," Aurora Douglas announced loudly, not addressing anyone in particular. "They know how to pamper VIPs, not like those other airlines, letting just anyone crawl into first class." His eyes glanced over at Amelia, full of undisguised contempt. Simon maintained a professional demeanor, but the tension was obvious. "Yes, Mr. Harrington. I apologize for letting your glass sit empty too long. I'll bring your Macallan 25 immediately." As Simon hurried away, Amelia quietly added another note to her report: professional service maintained but underlying disrespect toward other passengers, unresolved. Not long after George Whitmore, the man sitting across from Douglas, seized the opportunity while Douglas went to the restroom to move over next to Amelia. "I assume you've seen enough," George whispered. Amelia nodded, keeping her voice composed. "The biggest challenge is changing the culture without alienating high-revenue customers." George gave a thin smile. "But some customers, no matter how much money they bring in, aren't worth the cost of a company's dignity." That was the very argument Amelia had once made to the board of directors, and clearly it still echoed today. Returning to his seat, Douglas frowned when he saw George conversing with the woman he had spent the entire flight dismissing. "Mr. Whitmore," Douglas said ingratiatingly, "I didn't realize you knew her." George offered a faint smile. "We've worked together for many years. She's one of the sharpest business minds I've ever met." Douglas's face darkened. He pressed Brooks. "Any relation to Brooks? Shipping?" "No relation," Amelia replied, her eyes fixed on her tablet. "Good thing," Douglas sneered. "Heard they're getting sued for discrimination. Another fallout from these over-the-top diversity hires." Amelia's patience was like a wire stretched to its breaking point. "Perhaps we should enjoy the remainder of the flight in silence." Mr. Harrington Douglas's face flushed with anger. "I don't think you understand who you're talking to. I'm a diamond member of Aurora. One word from me and someone could lose their job." Before Amelia could respond, Lena Park leaned over her voice, soft but razor-sharp. "A video of how you're treating people could end your career at Harrington Fox and Partners. Your partners would love to see that clip go viral." Douglas opened his mouth to retort, then closed it. For the first time during the entire flight, real fear crossed his face. The seatbelt sign chimed as the captain announced light turbulence ahead, asking everyone to return to their seats. As if on cue, the plane jolted violently. Drinks spilled, and a few small screams echoed through the cabin. At that moment, Simon Gray, carrying Douglas's Macallan 25, stumbled and accidentally spilled the expensive scotch all over Douglas's pristine white suit. Douglas roared, "Useless idiot! This suit costs more than your monthly salary." Simon apologized frantically, offering napkins. "My deepest apologies, sir. Let me help." "Don't touch me," Douglas shouted. "I demand to speak to your superior. Bring the captain out here, I'll sue you. Give me your ID and full name." The first-class cabin fell into stunned silence. Amelia saw the look on Simon's face beginning to crack under the weight of humiliation. It was time, no more patience. "Mr. Harrington," she said, raising her voice with the natural authority she usually reserved for boardroom meetings. "That's enough," Douglas whipped around, stunned. "This has nothing to do with you. Actually, it has everything to do with me," Amelia said, standing up and turning to address the entire first-class cabin. "Thank you all for choosing Aurora Airlines for your journey today. If you're satisfied with your experience, we encourage you to leave feedback so we can continue improving our service." The unexpected announcement left the cabin bewildered exactly as Amelia intended. In that pause, she pulled a card from her pocket, the bold letters clearly visible. "Chief Executive Officer, Aurora Airlines." She turned to Simon, "Mr. Gray, please ensure that the cost of dry cleaning Mr. Harrington's suit is fully covered by the airline. Turbulence accidents are unfortunate, and we take full responsibility." Simon stared at the card, his expression shifting rapidly from shock to horror to utter confusion. Simon Gray's face clearly revealed shock, then recognition, and finally a flicker of fear. "Ms. Brooks, we had no idea," he stammered. That was exactly the point, Amelia Brooks replied with a small smile before turning to face Douglas Harrington, whose face had shifted from a furious red to a ghastly white. "Now, Mr. Harrington," she said calmly, but with an undeniable authority, "I believe you requested to speak with someone responsible for Aurora Airlines' service standards. I am very interested in hearing your feedback." The first-class cabin fell into absolute silence. Passengers who had previously pretended not to notice were now openly watching their curiosity unabashed. From a few rows back, Nathan Cross quietly activated his phone to record the scene, his expression a mix of professional excitement and genuine astonishment. Douglas Harrington, perhaps for the first time in his life, was utterly speechless. "There's been a misunderstanding," he stammered. "There's been no misunderstanding," Amelia replied firmly. "You've made your views very clear about diversity hires, about lowered standards, about who deserves to sit in first class." She raised her tablet, displaying the customer experience report she had been working on. "What you've demonstrated today will serve as excellent material for our next training session on unconscious bias and outstanding service standards." Across the aisle, George Whitmore smiled with satisfaction. Lena Park looked as if she was about to leap up and applaud. A passenger toward the back whispered in amazement, "Good Lord, that's Amelia Brooks." For Douglas, the revelation hit like a thunderclap. In a matter of moments, all his arrogant self-confidence evaporated into sheer panic. For the past 3 hours, he had been insulting the very person with the highest authority in the airline he relied on weekly for his business travels. "Brooks," he tried to recover with a strained voice. "Had I known—" "That's precisely the problem," Amelia interrupted. "Your behavior depends on who you think someone is, instead of respecting their basic human dignity." She turned to address the entire first-class cabin. "At Aurora Airlines, we are committed to building an environment of respect and inclusion for all passengers. What I witnessed today shows we still have work to do, and for that I offer my sincere apologies. Change will happen, and I personally commit to it." Then she turned back to Douglas Harrington. "As for you, Mr. Harrington, your Diamond membership will be temporarily suspended pending a full review. We value our high-revenue customers, but we do not and will not sacrifice human dignity to retain them." Douglas's face drained of color. "You can't do that. Do you know how much my company spends with Aurora every year?" "Approximately $2 million according to the latest records," Amelia answered immediately, unflinching, "a significant sum, but not enough to purchase the right to disrespect others." She gave a soft, composed smile. "I suggest you use the remainder of this flight to reflect on how you wish to interact with our company going forward." With that, Amelia calmly sat down, fully aware that she had just created a pivotal moment, not just for herself, but for the culture of Aurora Airlines. No one, regardless of status or wealth, had the right to trample on the dignity of another human being. What Amelia could not predict was how quickly the story would spread. Nathan Cross, realizing he had just captured journalistic gold, was already drafting an entirely new feature far beyond the original assignment. Elsewhere, Lena Park quietly recorded her own clip of the incident, knowing that with her millions of followers on social media, the footage would soon dominate headlines. George Whitmore at that very moment was messaging board members to confirm that they had made the right decision, placing their trust in Amelia. For Simon Gray, the truth about Amelia's identity was a stunning wake-up call. How could he have failed to recognize the CEO of his own airline, the very woman whose portrait hung in every Aurora Airlines lounge? It was a harsh lesson about the dangers of unconscious assumptions. As the initial shock subsided, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin changed dramatically. Douglas Harrington shrank into silence, shooting occasional glares at Amelia, but daring not utter another word. Meanwhile, other passengers began to nod at Amelia, offering smiles filled with warmth and encouragement. Finally, a small elderly woman with eyes full of fierce spirit made her way over Mrs. Brooks, she said, her voice slightly trembling but strong. I've been flying with Aurora for 47 years. My husband and I took our honeymoon flight on your DC-8 back in 1976. Amelia smiled warmly. That's wonderful, Mrs. Fulton. Thank you for trusting us all these years. It's not blind. Trust, young lady, Margaret Fulton replied, her eyes shining brightly. The airline has changed a lot over the decades, not always for the better. There was a time when flying was something truly special, no matter which seat you were in. She paused, her gaze filled with hope. But today, what I witnessed gives me hope. Hope that those better days will return. Amelia Brooks nodded, listening attentively. This was exactly the kind of feedback she had hoped to gather when she embarked on this secret journey. What I witnessed today gives me hope. Mrs. Margaret Fulton continued, her voice thoughtful. Not because of the confrontation, though, that man surely deserved to be called out. It's because you committed to something beyond just profit margins, she sighed. My grandson, a black pilot, works for a rival airline. The stories he tells me about this industry. She shook her head, her face a mixture of sadness and fierce determination. Change has been long overdue, as Mrs. Margaret returned to her seat. Amelia felt the full weight of expectation, not just from the board or shareholders, but from every passenger and employee who had ever felt pushed aside by the old systems and outdated cultures ruling the airline industry. What was meant to be a simple customer experience audit had now evolved into a much greater mission. 2 rows back, Nathan Cross quietly took notes. 6 months ago, Amelia's appointment had made waves across the industry. She was the first black woman to lead a major U.S. airline, and she was only 38 years old. At the time, the media had focused solely on her academic accolades, her prestigious MBA from Harvard, her successful turnarounds of 2 regional airlines, and her 3 years of experience as Aurora Airlines' chief operating officer. But the real story, the way she had fought against the current in an industry dominated by white men twice her age, had yet to be told. And today, Nathan realized he was witnessing a defining moment that would reshape the way corporate leadership was perceived. He wondered, should the story be told as an exposé on first-class racism, an example of covert leadership strategy, or a portrait of a CEO brave enough to confront the darkest corners of her industry head-on? As the flight entered its final hour, Simon Gray approached Amelia, clearly wrestling with himself, but striving to maintain professionalism. "Ms. Brooks," he began seriously, "may I have a few minutes of your time?" Amelia motioned for him to sit in the empty seat beside her. "Of course, Simon." He sat down, wringing his hands nervously in his lap. "First, I want to apologize for not recognizing you. There's no excuse." Amelia smiled warmly. "That's all right. Not many people recognize a CEO dressed casually, especially at 35,000 feet. It's not just that I didn't recognize you." Simon lowered his head, his voice quiet. "When you boarded, I judged you based on appearances, not your character. That was my mistake, and it's exactly what diversity training was supposed to prevent." Amelia assessed the sincerity in his eyes. "The issue isn't recognition, Simon. It's about treating every passenger fairly, not just the ones who fit a certain mold." Simon nodded deeply, thoughtful. "I understand the theory, but today I finally felt it. When you chose water over champagne, I silently judged you. When Mr. Harrington insulted you, I subconsciously sided with him because of his diamond status. Hard truths to face, but I must face them." Amelia paused for a moment, then asked, "What do you think we need to change to ensure more consistent service?" Simon considered the question carefully before replying. "First, There should be clear limits on customer behavior that crew members aren't expected to tolerate, even from VIPs. Second, performance evaluations should focus on the quality of interactions, not just service speed. And lastly, leadership needs to genuinely back frontline staff when they uphold those standards. Amelia nodded, her eyes lighting up. Those are excellent suggestions. I'd like you to draft a detailed proposal from your frontline perspective and send it directly to me. Simon's surprise was visible. You want me to contribute to company policy, who has a clearer view of reality than those who serve passengers every day? Amelia smiled genuinely. I'm just passing through. You live in that reality. As Simon returned to his duties, visibly more confident, Amelia turned back to her tablet. Her customer experience report had now transformed into a blueprint for a sweeping cultural reform across the entire organization. Meanwhile, Douglas Harrington, pretending to sleep, was actually eavesdropping, peeking occasionally at them. Something about the way Amelia treated Simon with respect, straightforwardness, and without judgment triggered a bitter, uncomfortable thought in Douglas. Perhaps, just perhaps, this approach was more effective than the fear-driven hierarchical management style he had always believed in. As the plane began its descent, George Whitmore walked over to Amelia, his tone light. Not quite the quiet customer survey you had planned. Huh. Amelia sighed, half joking. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the situations we never expected. George nodded thoughtfully. The board will be impressed. You showed incredible courage. But sadly, Amelia shook her head. Standing up for basic human dignity shouldn't require courage. That's the real problem. George fell silent for a moment, his expression serious. When we chose you as CEO, many of us worried you might be too idealistic for a ruthless industry like aviation, where sometimes passengers are treated more like self-loading cargo than human beings. He looked her directly in the eyes. But now I realize we didn't go far enough. Aurora, Airlines didn't just need a brilliant financial strategist, we needed a moral compass. As the plane touched down and taxied toward the terminal, Amelia Brooks sat quietly reflective. This journey hadn't just been about geographic travel, it had been a journey of revelation, illuminating every hidden corner of the organization she now led. The problems were deeper than she had anticipated, but so too was the opportunity to change everything. The issues Amelia Brooks had uncovered ran much deeper than she had initially expected. But at the same time, she also recognized the real opportunities for meaningful change. When the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began gathering their belongings. Douglas Harrington stood abruptly, deliberately avoiding everyone's gaze, his posture radiating wounded pride and simmering resentment. Mr. Harrington, Amelia called out, her voice rising before she even realized it. He turned back reluctantly, his expression guarded. Ms. Brooks, the review of your Diamond membership will be conducted fairly, Amelia said, lowering her voice just enough for only the two of them to hear. Today was a failure on both sides. You crossed the line of respect, but Aurora Airlines also failed to create an environment where every passenger feels valued. As CEO, that's my responsibility. Surprise flickered across Douglas's face. For the first time, he saw a leader willing to own shortcomings without deflecting blame. I acknowledge your candor, he said stiffly, nodding. We still have a lot of work to do, Amelia continued, and I hope you will continue to demand high standards from us, just as we will expect mutual respect from our passengers. It wasn't an apology because Amelia had nothing to apologize for, but rather a recognition that lasting change demands cooperation, not just punishment. Douglas nodded silently and walked toward the exit. Amelia knew that their brief encounter wouldn't instantly dismantle his deeply entrenched beliefs, but perhaps it had created the first small crack in his fortress of arrogance. As Amelia gathered her belongings, she noticed Nathan Cross standing near the aircraft door, his press badge swinging from his neck. "Ms. Brooks," he began, "I'm Nathan Cross from Global Business Monthly. We actually have an interview scheduled for tomorrow, but after what I witnessed today, I'd like to request an additional interview focusing on this incident." Amelia raised an eyebrow, half smiling. Nathan looked slightly flustered but maintained his professionalism. "This is a story about real leadership." He explained a story that typical CEO profiles rarely capture. Amelia considered for a moment, then nodded. "Meet me at Aurora Airlines headquarters tomorrow as planned. Mr. Cross, what happened today will certainly influence our conversation, but I believe there's an even bigger story, a story about the transformation of an entire industry." As she exited the plane, Amelia shook hands with each member of the crew, noting how each one interacted and responded. Simon Gray, standing by the exit, offered her a look filled with newfound respect. "Thank you for the wake-up call. Ms. Brooks," he said quietly, "I won't forget it." Waiting just outside the jet bridge was Lena Park, wearing a knowing smile. "I have a feeling Aurora Airlines will be the only airline I fly from now on," she said. She handed Amelia a business card. "What you did today, that's the kind of leadership we in the tech world are starving for. When you're ready, reach out. We'd love to discuss how neurogenics can help monitor service inequality patterns through AI." Amelia thanked her and carefully tucked the card away. Instead of taking the VIP shortcut, she deliberately walked through the regular passenger concourse to fully absorb the journey of an everyday traveler. She knew the story of what had just happened would spread quickly. By tomorrow it would appear in internal industry briefings. By next week it might become a case study in business leadership seminars. But Amelia also knew that the real work wouldn't happen on headlines. It would unfold quietly, persistently in new training programs, revised service protocols, updated passenger evaluation standards, and in redefining what premium service truly meant. As she made her way toward the terminal, George Whitmore joined her. "The board meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday," he reminded her. "I assume you'll want to present some preliminary findings from this survey." Amelia smiled lightly. "More than findings, George. I'll be presenting a comprehensive cultural overhaul plan. What we witnessed today wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a system that's been neglected for too long." George nodded without surprise. "There will be resistance from people like Harrison and Jameson. They still believe coddling customers like Harrington is the only path to profitability." "Then I'll prove," Amelia said firmly, "that respect and financial success are not mutually exclusive. Luckily, I now have the data to back that up." As they parted ways at the terminal, Amelia felt a new strength rising within her. What had begun as a secret mission to gather data had now become a landmark event that would define her entire leadership tenure. What Amelia could not foresee, however, was that within just 24 hours, the footage of her confrontation with Douglas Harrington would leak, thrusting her and Aurora Airlines into the center of a national debate about race class and corporate responsibility. An anonymous passenger seated a few rows back had quietly recorded the entire incident, and by the following morning, that clip would have millions of views. The video capturing the events of that day quickly made its way onto morning television shows and became a hot topic in business schools across the country. For Amelia Brooks, the road ahead was now both clearer and more complex than she had imagined. Public attention opened the door for real transformation, but also raised the stakes should she fail. As she settled into the company car waiting outside, Amelia opened her phone and began drafting a message to her executive leadership team. The subject line was simple: "The transformation begins today." 3 months after that fateful flight tension filled the boardroom at Aurora Airlines headquarters, the senior leadership team sat waiting for Amelia's arrival, anticipation hanging in the air. Today's meeting would unveil the results of the first quarter following the implementation of the sweeping reform program internally nicknamed the Harrington Protocol. Bennett Harrison, the veteran CFO and one of the most skeptical voices of Amelia's reforms, flipped through the printed report, his expression sour. First-class revenue is up 17%, he mumbled to Diane Jameson, head of revenue management. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Diane replied, unable to hide her surprise. Diamond tier retention is at 94%. We did lose 6% of our older VIPs, but we gained 23% new ones. Looks like a lot of wealthy passengers are willing to pay more to avoid toxic environments, she concluded. The doors opened. Amelia Brooks entered with composed confidence, followed by Simon Gray, now serving in his new role as Chief Passenger Experience Officer, and Lena Park, whose neurogenics AI system had been successfully integrated into Aurora's customer feedback infrastructure. Good morning. Amelia greeted her charcoal gray suit, a sharp contrast to the casual attire she wore that pivotal day. Before we dive into the numbers, I want to thank you all for your commitment this past quarter. Change is never easy, especially when it challenges long-held assumptions. At the far end of the table, George Whitmore nodded approvingly. Even he hadn't expected the speed and impact of the changes Amelia had driven. Let's start with the key metrics. Amelia continued displaying the first slide. Total revenue up 12% year-over-year. Customer satisfaction scores improved across all cabins, with the biggest gains in first and business class. Employee retention rate up 8%. Flight attendant applications more than doubled. Bennett Harrison stared at the numbers, his disbelief barely masked. These results run completely counter to industry trends. That's because we've redefined what premium service means. Simon Gray said, his voice steadier and more confident than it had been 3 months earlier. It's not just champagne and lie-flat seats. It's about creating a respectful environment where every passenger is treated as someone who belongs. Lena Park nodded and added, sentiment analysis from social media shows that positive mentions of Aurora have increased by 40%. The most commonly associated words are respect, dignity, and inclusion, and we're seeing a direct correlation with booking intent across all customer segments. The meeting continued with thoughtful questions and dynamic discussion about future strategies. Amelia observed quietly, a deep sense of fulfillment blooming within her. At last, the values she had championed were not only recognized as a moral necessity, but now proven as a sound business strategy. No one directly mentioned the now famous video, but its shadow was present in every conversation. The confrontation between Amelia and Douglas Harrington had become a modern case study dissected in Harvard Business Review articles, featured in TED Talks on corporate culture. Douglas himself remained silent in the press. However, 3 weeks after the flight, Amelia received a handwritten letter from him, not a direct apology, but an acknowledgement that the encounter had forced him to reflect on his own behavior. Even more surprising, Douglas had enrolled his company's entire leadership team in a course on inclusive management, small steps but meaningful. The meeting adjourned. Executives filed out until only George Whitmore remained. "You've exceeded even my most optimistic expectations," he said, pride glowing in his voice. "But the real test is ahead. Can these changes hold as we scale them system-wide? Will they survive when the economy dips and cost-cutting pressures mount?" "That's exactly why we're documenting, archiving, and standardizing everything," Amelia replied. "Every policy change, every training module, every metric, we're embedding these new principles into the DNA of Aurora so they're not dependent on who's in charge." George nodded slowly. "Toxic cultures don't emerge overnight. They're built by systems that reward the wrong behaviors for years. And dismantling those systems, Amelia added, takes time and persistence. But we're starting to see results. She smiled. You know, last week Simon Gray personally intervened when a first-class passenger verbally abused a flight attendant. He calmly gave them a choice: change your behavior or get off the flight. And you know what happened? George raised an eyebrow. The rest of the cabin applauded. The thunderous applause from passengers as the unruly traveler was escorted off the plane marked a symbolic moment, a clear sign that the change had truly begun. George Whitmore murmured, almost as if thinking aloud, "The ripple effects are spreading beyond Aurora. I've heard from a few contacts at other airlines. They're reevaluating their passenger conduct policies. You've changed the way this entire industry talks about respect." After he left, Amelia Brooks remained seated in the now empty boardroom. She allowed herself a quiet moment to reflect on the journey of the past 3 months. The transformation was far from complete. Deep-seated habits and mindsets could not be erased overnight, but the foundation for a new era had been laid. Her phone buzzed gently with a new notification. Nathan Cross had just published his long-form article about her leadership journey in Global Business Monthly, titled "The Economy Class CEO: How Amelia Brooks is Changing Aviation from the Inside Out." Amelia chuckled softly, a striking title, even if technically she had flown first class on that fateful flight. But the fact that she had been willing to experience her own airline as an ordinary customer, that was too powerful a symbol for the media to resist. The article was thoughtful and thorough. Nathan didn't just highlight the viral confrontation, he carefully chronicled the strategic changes that followed. He interviewed everyone from board members to baggage handlers, painting a full picture of Aurora's cultural transformation. Most importantly, Nathan captured the essence of Amelia's leadership philosophy, that dignity is not a privilege reserved for premium-paying customers, but a non-negotiable foundation upon which all service must be built. As Amelia prepared to leave for her next meeting, her phone rang again. The caller ID flashed Aurora Airlines' switchboard. Her assistant's voice came through the line. "Ms. Brooks, we have a call for you from Mrs. Margaret Fulton, the elderly lady from that flight." Amelia smiled warmly. "I remember her. Please put her through." A soft click, then a slightly trembling but firm voice came through Ms. Brooks. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Mrs. Fulton. It's wonderful to hear from you. I just returned from visiting my grandson in Denver," she said. "Of course I chose Aurora again, and everything felt different." She paused briefly before continuing. "The young man sitting next to me in first class was wonderfully courteous, helping me with my luggage without making me feel fragile, and the crew, they were genuinely warm, not forced, truly heartfelt." Amelia smiled into the phone. "I'm so glad to hear that, Mrs. Fulton." "You know," the older woman added, her voice thick with emotion. "My grandson said there's a growing buzz among pilots about Aurora. He's considering transferring over when his contract ends." After bidding farewell, Amelia stood and walked to the boardroom window. From there, she could see the fleet of Aurora Airlines aircraft parked nearby, each bearing the signature globe emblem, now slowly gaining a new meaning across the entire industry. The road ahead would not be easy. Deeply ingrained habits would resist change. Financial pressures would always tempt the company to revert to the old ways, catering to the highest bidder at all costs. But something fundamental had changed, both within Aurora and within Amelia Brooks herself. That undercover flight intended merely as a customer experience. Survey had become a defining moment for her leadership. A clear declaration that respect and dignity are not luxuries, they are the bare minimum standard. As she walked briskly toward her next meeting, Amelia couldn't help but reflect on the strange coincidence that had seated her in 2A next to Douglas Harrington on that particular day. Sometimes the most important journeys aren't about the destination, but about the truths revealed along the way. Passing through the executive hallway, she walked past Aurora's new mission statement, now prominently displayed in the lobby, connecting people through respect, dignity, and excellence, regardless of their journey or their seat. This time, it wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise, and Aurora was beginning to live it. As the plane gently touched down on the runway, it didn't just mark the end of a flight, it marked the beginning of a new journey, a journey to redefine dignity and respect in the airline industry. From a seemingly small moment on that flight, Amelia Brooks ignited a wave of change not only within Aurora Airlines, but across the entire industry. Because sometimes it only takes one person brave enough to stand up for the whole world to stop and rethink its values. Respect is not a privilege, it is a fundamental right of every human being. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help us spread more beautiful values like this one.